The gavel struck, and the dry sound of wood against wood echoed in the courtroom like a gunshot. For Theo Haddad, seated in the front row, the noise was a physical assault. He flinched, his hands covering his ears over the wool suit that pricked his skin. Every detail of that place was silent torture, the fluorescent light buzzing at an unbearable frequency, the strong perfume of the lawyer beside him, the incessant murmur of the gallery blending into a thick brown noise. His mother, Helena, Olsen Yang, squeezed his hand, a gentle, familiar touch, a point of calm in the midst of sensory chaos. In front of them, Judge Ivan Garnier-Costas, a man with a severe face and an impatient gaze, looked over his glasses at the defense attorney, Leah Patel. "Frankly, counselor," the judge said, his tone dripping with disdain, "we are wasting time. You intend to base your defense on the organization of a bookshelf? By color, no less?" A low, muffled laugh rippled through the room. Theo felt his face burn. They were laughing at him, at his world, at the only way he knew to bring order to the deafening noise of life. Helena felt her son tremble. She shot a furious look at the judge, a lioness protecting her cub. What could that man, in his black robe and his world of gray logic, understand about the symphony of colors that was her son's mind? He had no idea that the fate of an innocent man, Theo's father, Gael Teixeira, was written precisely in that rainbow of spines he had just ridiculed. Where are you watching this story from? I'd really like to know. And if you feel you need more stories that connect us, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming. To understand Theo's silence in that courtroom, one had to go back in time, back to a world where words didn't always make sense, but colors, oh, colors always told the truth. Helena remembered Theo as a baby, a quiet baby, who didn't cry much but could spend hours staring at the patterns of light the sun drew on the floor. While other mothers celebrated first words, mama or dada, Helena waited. At 3 years old, Theo still didn't speak full sentences. Instead, he communicated with objects. A red block meant hunger. A blue car meant he needed a hug. It was a language that only she and Gail, her husband, seemed to understand. The autism diagnosis came at 4 years old. The word sounded like a sentence to some, but for Helena, it was a relief. It was a name, a map. It didn't change who Theo was, but it gave them a direction to understand his particular universe. Theo's world wasn't made of complex social interactions or implicit rules. It was made of textures, sounds, patterns, and above all, colors. Colors were his emotional compass. Yellow was the joy of a sunny day in the park. Gray was the sadness of a scraped knee. Red was the overwhelming anger of an unexpected change in routine. His bookshelf was the epicenter of this universe. It started with the picture books they read before bed. Theo didn't care much for the stories, but he was fascinated by the spines. One day, Helena found him in his room, standing on a chair, methodically reorganizing his small shelf. He wasn't following alphabetical order or size. He was creating a spectrum, from the most vibrant red to the deepest violet. As time went on, the collection grew, and the system became more complex. The organization wasn't just aesthetic. It was a diary, a life record. Each book was anchored to a memory, a feeling. A sky blue book about dinosaurs sat next to a navy blue one about the ocean. To anyone else, it was a logical color choice. To Theo, sky blue was his 7th birthday, a happy, cloudless day. Navy blue was the memory of a visit to the aquarium with his father, a day of calm and deep admiration. The shelf was a map of his soul. Gail, his father, was the biggest supporter of that world. He was an engineer, a man of logic and numbers, but he saw the beauty in his son's unique logic. He never tried to force Theo to be normal. Instead, he entered his world. He brought books as gifts, not for the story, but for the color of the cover. "I think we're needing a bit more green hope in this section, champ," he'd say, handing Theo a book about rainforests. Theo's room, with that wall of books that looked like solidified rainbow, was the safest place in the world for the three of them. That sanctuary was violated the day 2 police officers knocked on their door. Gail was a partner. In a small tech company, there was a hole in the accounts, a huge sum of money diverted, and all the digital evidence meticulously manipulated pointed to him. His partner, Michael Cato, expressed shock and sadness, but cooperated with the police. handing over emails and records that seemed to incriminate Gale without a shadow of a doubt. Helena remembered Gale's face, pale and confused, as he was handcuffed in the living room. Theo stood in the hallway, paralyzed. He was clutching a lead-gray book, the book of fear, of confusion, of the world turning upside down. That night, and many nights that followed, Theo didn't sleep. He just sat in front of his bookshelf, moving the books, shifting the gray, trying to find an order, a color that would make the nightmare make sense. Theo's world of colorful certainties had been invaded by the monochrome, cruel confusion of reality, and Helena, looking at her son in the absence of her husband, felt a despair so profound it seemed to have no color at all. It was just emptiness. The first wave of hope came in the form of an expensive and renowned lawyer, Antoni Tran. He had an office downtown with glass walls and an impressive view. He spoke with the confidence of a man who had never lost a major case. Helena and Gale, speaking through thick glass in the prison visiting room, poured all their savings and their last hopes into him. Antoni was efficient, fast, and incisive. He analyzed the case, the prosecution's evidence, and drew up a strategy. The prosecution has a strong circumstantial case, but that's all it is, he told Helena in one of their meetings. Our best defense is character. Gale is a family man, a respected member of the community. That's what we'll sell to the jury. Helena felt a chill. And Theo? He can help. He remembers everything. The days, the conversations. Antoni Tran smiled, a polished smile, but devoid of empathy. Mrs. Yang, with all due respect, the last thing we want is to put your son on the stand. The prosecution would tear him to shreds. They would use his peculiarities against us. They'd say he's not a reliable witness. We need to present an image of stability, of normalcy. The word normalcy hit Helena like a punch. She had spent her entire life fighting against that label, defending Theo's right to be exactly who he was. And now, the man who was supposed to save her family was asking her to hide her son, to treat him like a shame, a weakness in the case. She tried to argue, but his memory is extraordinary. He associates events with colors, with books. He remembers the day Michael Cato came to our house, just before Gale's arrest. Theo became very agitated. He grabbed a yellow and black book, a book about wasps. He felt there was danger. The lawyer interrupted her, his patience wearing thin. Helena, this isn't evidence. This is anecdotal. Poetic perhaps, but useless in a courtroom. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. Keep Theo away from this. Focus on appearing as a strong, united family. The false hope he sold had a bitter price, the denial of her son's essence. For weeks, Helena followed his advice. She tried to prepare Theo for the possibility of not seeing his father for a long time, without being able to explain why. She tried to maintain a facade of calm while falling apart inside. The social pressure was immense. Well-meaning friends like Inez Johnson said things like, maybe it's best for Theo to stay with his grandparents while away from all this stress. They didn't understand that separating Theo from his home, his routine, his bookshelf, would be like tearing off his skin. Gale, in prison, sank into despair. The letters he wrote were full of anguish. He missed the smell of Helena's hair, the silent sound of Theo reading in the next room. He was losing faith. The system seemed like an impersonal machine designed to crush him. The breaking point for Helena came during a preparation session with Antoni Tran. He was coaching her on how to dress, how to speak, how to cry sympathetically in court. Think of yourself as an actress playing the role of the loyal, suffering wife, he said. That night, Helena entered Theo's room. He was asleep, hugging a moss-green book, the book Gale had given him on their last trip together to the mountains, the book of longing. Looking at her son, so pure in his complex world, and at the bookshelf, a vibrant testament to his life, Helena made a decision. The normalcy the world demanded was a lie. Their truth, their family's truth, was right there, in that room, organized by color. And if the system couldn't see it, then the system was wrong. The next morning, with a calm she hadn't felt in months, Helena called Antoni Tran's office and fired him. The false hope had dissolved, leaving her alone in the dark, but for the first time, free to fight their way. The panic that followed Antoni Tran's dismissal was overwhelming. Helena felt like she had jumped off a ship, at sea without a life jacket. The trial was approaching and they had no one. The prosecutor, an ambitious man named James Maurice Thomas, seemed to smell blood in the water, intensifying the pressure. Friends and family, who had offered advice before, now looked at her with a mixture of pity and disapproval. "You fired the best lawyer in town? Why?" Her brother, Rafael Ito, asked over the phone, his voice heavy with disbelief. How could she explain? How could she put into words that the best defense for the world was the worst defense for her soul? The conflict wasn't just legal. It was deeply human. It was the world of linear logic and concrete evidence versus Theo's synesthetic and intuitive universe. And Helena was on the border, desperately trying to build a bridge between the two. Gail's father, a pragmatic and somewhat rigid man, came to visit her. He loved his grandson, but never fully understood Theo's world. "Helena, I know you want to protect the boy," he said, sitting uncomfortably in the living room, avoiding looking into Theo's room. "But reality is harsh. Gael is in prison. We need someone who plays their game, not someone who tries to invent new rules." It was the voice of reason, the voice of fear, and she hated it because a part of her knew he might be right. Society's gaze was a constant weight. The mothers at Theo's school now greeted her with a quick nod and averted their eyes. She was the criminal's wife, the strange boy's mother. Loneliness was a cold cloak. Every night after Theo slept, Helena would sit in the kitchen and cry silently, fear and doubt gnawing at her resolve. What if she was wrong? What if, in her attempt to honor Theo's truth, she was condemning Gail to years in prison? Judge Ivan Garnier Costas, who would preside over the case, was already known for his aversion to anything that deviated from the script. In a preliminary hearing for bail, which was denied, he made a cutting remark about the need to focus on facts, not family dramas. Helena saw in his eyes the same impatience, the same disdain she had seen in Antoni Tran. They were men of the same mold, carved from the same block of unyielding certainty. The dilemma consumed her: fight the way the world understood, with a defense that erased her son's essence, or risk everything on a truth no one seemed capable of comprehending. One night, exhausted, she entered Theo's room. He wasn't sleeping. He was sitting on the floor, surrounded by books. He wasn't organizing them. He was lining them up, creating a path of colors on the carpet. It started with a light green book, the start of Gail's company, went through several yellows and oranges, the successes, and then, abruptly, a series of dark gray and brown books. At the end of the line alone was a black book with a single yellow stripe. Theo pointed to it. "The snake in the garden," he whispered, one of the few complete sentences he spoke in days. Helena knelt down. She picked up the book. It was a reptile guide that Michael Cato had given Theo as a birthday present. The snake in the garden. That's how Theo saw his father's partner. In that moment, Helena's internal conflict dissolved. Doubt transformed into a fierce certainty. Her son's mind wasn't a labyrinth, it was a map, and she would rather get lost following that map than follow the safe, soulless path everyone else pointed to. She didn't know how, but she would make the world learn to read Theo's colors. The turning point didn't come with a thunderclap, but with a whisper. It was the name of a lawyer, Leah Patel, whispered by another mother in an online support group for parents of neurodivergent children. "She's not a big courtroom star," the woman wrote, "but she listens, really listens." Desperate, Helena made an appointment. Leah Patel's office didn't have glass walls or panoramic views. It was a small room, cluttered with books and case files, smelling of coffee and paper. Leah was a calm-looking woman, with eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface. She didn't start with questions about the case, but about Theo. "Tell me about him," she said, and her pen remained still on her notepad for almost an hour, while Helena spoke. Helena told her everything. About the colors, the rituals, the bookshelf that was a diary. About the snake in the garden book. For the first time, the person across the table didn't interrupt her, didn't smile condescendingly, didn't try to frame Theo's story into a box of normalcy. Leah just listened, her chin resting on her hand, her expression of intense concentration. When Helena finished, the lawyer was silent for a moment. "May I meet him?" she asked. "I'd like to see the bookshelf." 2 days later, Leah Patel stood at Theo's bedroom door. She didn't rush in. She remained there, as if asking permission to enter a sacred space. Theo, who usually hid from strangers, looked at her, then turned back to the books. Leah entered slowly and sat on the floor at a respectful distance. She didn't ask Theo direct questions. Instead, she pointed to a red book. "What a beautiful color," she said softly. "Red makes me think of strawberries and the fire truck." Theo looked at her, his head tilted. He took the red book and placed it back on the shelf. Then he picked up an orange book and extended it to her. Helena held her breath. Leah took the book. "Orange," she said thoughtfully. "Sunset." Theo shook his head. He went to the kitchen and came back with an orange. He placed it next to the book. Then he picked up a toy that made a loud, irritating noise and put it next to the red book. Leah Patel looked at the objects, at the books, at Theo, and then a glimmer of understanding flickered in her eyes. "Ah," she said, almost to herself. "It's not the color. It's the feeling, the association. Red is loud, annoying, an alarm. Orange is calm, sweet." Theo smiled. A small, rare smile that lit up his entire face. He had been understood. That was the silent turning point. Leah began spending afternoons at their house not as a lawyer, but as a student learning a new language. She and Theo developed a system. She brought colorful sticky notes and asked him to place them on a large calendar, marking the days leading up to Gail's arrest. A gray sticky note for a sad day, a blue for a calm day, a red for a day of argument. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. The weeks before the money diversion, which the prosecution described as normal, were marked on Theo's calendar with a profusion of dark colors: brown, dark gray, olive green, colors of anxiety. "Daddy worried," Theo explained, pointing to the colors. And then, the most important part, the day of the alleged crime, the day Gail, according to the prosecution, was alone in his office transferring the funds. On Theo's calendar that day had a bright yellow sticky note. "Yellow?" Leah asked. "Theo, yellow is happy?" Theo shook his head. He went to the bookshelf and took out the Snake in the Garden book, the one with the yellow stripe. And then he took out another book, one entirely yellow, a book about the sun that Helena used to read to him when he was little. He placed them side by side. "Yellow surprise," he said, pointing to the snake book. "And yellow happy." He pushed the sun book away and tapped his finger on the snake book. "Yellow surprise," he repeated, emphasizing. "Visit." Noise at the door. Leah felt a shiver. A surprise visit. On the day and at the hour. Gail was supposed to be alone. This wasn't just a feeling, it was an alibi. Hidden all along in the logic of colors of a boy the world had dismissed as an unreliable witness. Help hadn't come from an expensive expert, but from someone who had the humility to learn a language no one else bothered to hear. The path from understanding to concrete evidence was an exercise in patience and translation. Leah and Theo spent days building what she called the emotional color dictionary. Each color had a nuance. Green wasn't just green. There was the green hope of Gail's new project and the sickly green of the anxiety that consumed him in the final weeks. The first small victory was when Leah managed to align Theo's color calendar with Gail's phone records. The days Theo marked with red and brown sticky notes, the days of argument and worry, perfectly corresponded to a series of tense and long calls between Gail and Michael Cato, calls that the previous defense had ignored. It didn't prove anything, but it showed a pattern of conflict where the prosecution painted a picture of complicity. Their work became a ritual. Leah would arrive, take off her shoes at the door, and sit on the floor in Theo's room. She never rushed him. Sometimes, they would spend an hour in silence just looking at the bookshelf, before Theo felt comfortable enough to speak. Their language was a mix of words, objects, and colors. A black book about black holes placed next to a gray business book meant the money disappeared. The biggest discovery came from the yellow surprise. "Theo, do you remember the visit?" Leah asked gently. "What happened?" Theo didn't answer with words. He got up and walked around the house, recreating the scene. He went to the front door, made the sound of a doorbell. Ding-dong. Then he went to Gail's office, mimicked the sound of his father talking on the phone, his voice low and tense. Then, he returned to the door and made a gesture of opening it. He picked up the snake book and held it as if receiving a gift. "For you," he said, imitating a voice that was neither his nor his father's. It was Michael Cato's voice. He then ran to his room and hid under the bed. Leah felt her heart pound. Michael Cato had been at their house that day, at that hour, giving Theo a gift while Gail was busy on a business call in his office. This directly contradicted the prosecution's claim that Gail was alone, and Cato's claim that he was in another city that day. "Helena," Leah said, her voice controlled but filled with urgency. "Were there security cameras on the street? Any neighbors who might have seen a car?" A frantic hunt began. Helena and Leah spent days talking to neighbors. No one remembered anything specific. It seemed like a dead end. The small victory seemed destined to remain small, a truth understood only within the walls of that house. But then, Helena remembered something. A neighbor, an elderly recluse named Mr. Finn Sokolov-Levy, had a hobby. He tested amateur video cameras and sometimes left them recording the street's activity for hours. He was seen as the neighborhood eccentric. With her heart in her mouth, Helena knocked on his door. Mr. Levi was suspicious at first, but when Helena explained the situation, his eyes softened. "The boy with the colorful books," he said, "always quiet." He took them to a room full of old equipment. After hours of sifting through tapes and hard drives, they found it. A grainy, poor quality image, but unmistakable. Michael Cato's car, parked in front of Gail's house for exactly 15 minutes on the afternoon of the crime. Helena cried. Leah smiled. An exhausted but triumphant smile. It was the first piece of external evidence that validated Theo's world. A boy's gaze, a whispered word, a black and yellow book, had just opened the first real crack in the prosecution's seemingly perfect case. The victory was still small, a grain of sand against a mountain, but for the first time, they had a stone to throw. The courtroom felt like a parallel universe, hostile and gray, in stark contrast to Theo's vibrant world. Helena felt every gaze upon them, the weight of a judgment that went beyond the legal verdict. Beside her, Theo was in his own world, tracing the wood grain patterns of the bench in front of him with his finger, a small ritual to anchor himself amidst the sensory storm. When Leah Patel called Theo Haddad to testify, a murmur of surprise swept through the courtroom. The prosecutor, James Marias Thomas, stood up with a smug smile, ready for what he clearly considered a massacre. Judge Costas sighed with theatrical impatience. The scene that followed was what Helena feared most, and, at the same time, what gave her a strange strength. Leah did not take Theo to the witness stand. With the permission of a reluctant judge, she brought a small table and placed on it a dozen books from Theo's bookshelf, arranged in a precise rainbow. "Theo," Leah began, her voice calm and clear, "can you show us the book for Daddy Happy?" Theo, without hesitation, picked up a bright orange book. "And the book for Daddy Worried?" He pointed to a dark brown one. The prosecutor objected. "Objection, Your Honor. This is irrelevant and childish." It was then that the judge made the comment that would echo in Helena's mind forever. "Counselor Patel, I agree with the prosecution. Where are you trying to go with this? Do you intend to base your defense on the organization of a bookshelf? By color, no less?" The muffled laughter. Theo's face contorting in pain. But this time something was different. Leah did not back down. She looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor, what to you and me is a simple color, to Theo is a way of processing and recording information with a precision most of us have lost. This is not a bookshelf. It is a timeline. It is a diary, and I ask the court for the patience to let us read it." Leah's unexpected firmness silenced the room. The judge, caught off guard, waved his hand, a gesture of "proceed but be brief." Leah then turned to Theo and picked up the snake book, the reptile guide with the yellow stripe. "Theo, tell us about the day of the yellow surprise." With Leah's gentle guidance, Theo told his story, not in a linear fashion but in fragments of pure sensory truth. The doorbell made noise. Loud. Red. He picked up the red book. "Daddy on the phone." Gray voice. He pointed to the gray book. The man, the snake, gave the book. He held up the black and yellow book. "Yellow surprise, not yellow happy." The prosecutor tried to intervene, to disqualify him. "The boy can't even form coherent sentences. How can we trust his testimony?" Leah anticipated him. "Your Honor, the prosecution has presented digital records as evidence, bits and bytes that, as we know, can be manipulated. What we are presenting is a human record. Theo's memory doesn't work with words, but it works with unshakable consistency. A consistency that, incidentally, is corroborated by evidence. It was the turning point. Leah projected Mr. Levi's grainy image onto a screen. Michael Cato's car. Then she showed Cato's phone records, which placed him in another city. His lie was exposed. Then she showed Gail's phone records, proving he was on a long and important business call at home, exactly as Theo had described with the gray voice. Theo's logic, once ridiculed, was suddenly fitting with the gray facts of the world. The bookshelf was no longer a whim. It was the key that unlocked the truth. Helena looked at the jury. The skeptical expressions had been replaced by deep attention. They were no longer looking at a strange boy. They were looking at a witness. Helena reflected on the journey to that point. The pain of misunderstanding, the fear of loneliness, the pressure to conform. She realized that true acceptance wasn't about making the world understand Theo on its own terms, but about making the world recognize the validity of Theo's terms. The real victory wouldn't just be freeing Gail, but freeing the world's perception of her son. In that courtroom, Theo's color logic was, for the first time, speaking louder than prejudice. And in that silent, colorful truth lay the deepest form of justice. The verdict was not immediate. The revelation in court forced the reopening of the investigation. Michael Cato was called to testify again, and confronted with the evidence of his car and the conflicting phone records, his story crumbled. He confessed to framing Gail to cover up his own embezzlement. The day Gail Teixeira walked through the prison gates was not one of boisterous celebration. It was one of deep, sacred silence. Helena rushed into his arms, and they held each other for a long time, wordless, just feeling the relief that was almost as heavy as the pain that preceded it. Theo stood a little behind, next to Leah Patel, watching. When Gail approached him, he didn't hug him tightly. He knew that would be too much. Instead, he knelt down and simply extended his hand. Theo touched it with his fingertips and then handed his father a sky-blue book he had brought with him. The book from his 7th birthday. The book of the happy, cloudless day. Life didn't return to normal, because their normal had been redefined. Gail needed time to recover from the trauma of prison. The family faced financial hardship to rebuild. Theo continued to be Theo. The world was still a loud and sometimes scary place. The pain of the experience didn't magically disappear. It settled into them, becoming part of their story, like a dark gray book on their life's bookshelf. But something fundamental had changed. They were no longer fighting against Theo's world. They were living in harmony with it. Gail began consulting the truth shelf, as he playfully called it. "Theo, what color was my meeting today?" And Theo would respond with a nod, or by pointing to a book, a communication that was now the family's secret and precious language. Judge Ivan Garnier Costas never apologized. But months later, Helena learned that he had enrolled in a seminar on neurodiversity in the justice system. A small, almost invisible, but significant change. Leah Patel became an advocate for neurodivergent witnesses, using Theo's case as an example of how justice needs to learn new languages to find the truth. The greatest transformation, however, was internal. Helena stopped worrying about what others thought. The need for external validation disappeared, replaced by a deep certainty in her family's strength. She realized that what many saw as her son's deficiency was, in fact, his greatest strength. His inability to lie, his pure sensory perception, his unshakable color logic. These were not flaws in a normal system. They were the qualities of a different, and in many ways, superior operating system. The closing of their journey was not a fairy tale ending, but something much more real and hopeful. It was the understanding that pain and joy can coexist, that scars can remind us of our strength. Happiness wasn't the absence of problems, but the presence of tools to face them. And their most powerful tool was the unconditional love and acceptance of the unique way each of them saw the world. One afternoon, Helena found Gail and Theo sitting on the floor in the room, silently building a tower of colorful blocks. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the dancing dust, motes in the air and the magnificent bookshelf, the silent monument to their resilience. In that moment of peace, Helena understood. They hadn't just survived. They had found a new, truer way of being a family, not despite Theo's mind, but because of it. And that was the most beautiful and colorful truth of all. Sometimes the purest logic isn't in the codes of law or the rules of society, but in the colors of a bookshelf, waiting for someone with a heart open enough to learn to read. The human mind is an infinite spectrum, and true wisdom is recognizing the beauty in each of its colors. If this story touched you in any way, please like it, comment what you felt, and subscribe to the channel. Someone you know, or even you, might need to hear a message like this today. Sharing stories of empathy is the first step towards building a world that welcomes all ways of seeing and being.